As election season takes off in India, allegations by Prime Minister Modi and External Affairs Minister Jaishankar of foreign interference heat up the campaign. We look at the history of such allegations worldwide and whether there's basis for New Delhi's present concerns. Hello and welcome to Worldview at The Hindu with me, Suhasini Haider. With elections on, diplomatic activity may be on the back burner, but undiplomatic activity seems to be in the spotlight as the Prime Minister and the External Affairs Minister accused global powers and the Western media of running interference in Indian elections.
भारत शक्तिशाली हो गया तो कुछ ताकतों का खेल ही बिगड़ जाएगा। इसलिए वो भारत में कांग्रेस और इंडी गठबंधन की कमजोर सरकार चाहते हैं।
Yes, I get a lot of these noises from the Western press. And if they criticize our democracy, it's not because they lack information. It is because they think they're also political players in our election.
So what were they speaking about? What really is of concern to New Delhi? To begin with, the reactions in the United States, in Germany, and even at the United Nations that spoke about the arrest of Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal, and then perhaps for the first time spoke of the need for free and fair elections in India. Listen in.
That in any country that is having elections, that everyone's rights are protected, including political and civil rights, and everyone is able to vote in an atmosphere that is free and fair.
The people of India will ensure the elections are free and fair, so don't worry about it.
So a response from the External Affairs Minister there, and the MEA also summoned the German Deputy Ambassador and a senior US official to protest those comments. Secondly, there's been the release of human rights reports, especially during election season by the US as well as the EU Parliament. So the EU Parliament in January passed a resolution on Indian human rights concerns about them, referred to divisive speeches by leaders. And then just this week in the United States, Secretary of State Antony Blinken released a report that said that there are significant human rights abuses in India. It spoke of lynchings, it spoke of Manipur violence, and several other issues on the political landscape as well. The Ministry of External Affairs response, as you can imagine, was tough. Listen in.
This report, as per understanding, is deeply biased and reflects a very poor understanding of India. We attach no value to it and urge you also to do the same.
But then thirdly, there's the worry that embassies and diplomats in India, based in India, are interfering in India's internal politics. There have long been these allegations by this government on Pakistan, for example, including in Gujarat elections last time. But more recently, the government has accused Canadian officials based in India of interfering in India's internal affairs. It then even ordered the High Commission to downsize its numbers, remember, in the context of the allegations over the assassination of Nijjar in Canada and the plot against Panun in the United States. Of course, the government's high-level panel continues to investigate these. Fourthly, and finally, there is the barrage of criticism of Indian elections, of Indian democratic processes in the Western media that really seems to upset the government. Despite Prime Minister Modi giving interviews to foreign publications like the Financial Times and the Newsweek, there's a list, in fact, if you look at, compiled by someone close to the government, the former CEO of Prasar Bharati, is the head of AI for India, artificial intelligence. And he talks about really the kind of headlines India is generating right now, which of course the government thinks are unfair. In addition, there were other reactions. This week, a reporter for Australian broadcaster ABC said she had to leave India due to a documentary she made that was banned by the government on YouTube, and also a refusal of her visa extension. This is something the government denied. They said they were able to give her a visa at the last minute, but she left anyway. And then in Ireland also this week, India's ambassador came in for criticism for what was called overstretching his mandate with this response to the Irish Times, where he defended the current government but also criticized previous Indian governments, which led to calls for his sacking from the opposition. So there's been a lot of heat generated, a lot of news generated over these allegations of Western bias and foreign interference. Now, the Indian worries over foreign interference are yet to be proven, but globally, there are also many other such fears, especially as more than 60 countries around the world go to polls this year, and we discussed that at Worldview. According to an Oxford University study, which you can see online, it's called Industrialized Disinformation. This was made in 2020. It was a global inventory of organized social media manipulation. And that study found at least 81 countries' governments attempt cyber manipulation for propaganda and disinformation. Some of them on their own countries' people, but many of them are about foreign interference. So we've seen more recently some of this coming out. One, this week, US President Joe Biden signed a bill that forces TikTok owner ByteDance to sell the company in the next year or face being banned, as the US Congress believes it is being used by China's ruling Communist Party to influence elections in the US, also to spy on Americans. And that's a charge the company has denied. In 2018, remember, the US Senate released a report as well that concluded that Russia's spy agencies used social media like Facebook ads to manipulate US voters in the election that Donald Trump won in 2016. Canada just completed an investigation on foreign interference during previous elections. Remember, its NSA had said that countries including Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan, and even India may have tried to manipulate them. Eventually, however, the Prime Minister came out. The report did not find conclusive evidence against India, but it did find a lot of evidence against China. The United Kingdom also conducted a similar inquiry last year. Third, this month, Microsoft, the company, issued a warning that Chinese state-backed cyber troops, as they call them, would attempt to disrupt elections in the US, in South Korea, and in India this year using artificial intelligence-generated content and with support from North Korean groups. This following what they called a trial run during the presidential election in Taiwan. Of course, however, Taiwan didn't elect a pro-China president. He's seen broadly as pro-independence or anti-China. Fourth, there was in India's neighborhood itself. And we've seen this over the years, but perhaps more recently, India is accused in Bangladesh, in the Maldives, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, of leaning in favor, particularly Indian agencies, leaning in favor of one party or another to oust what are called anti-India leaders. These have yet to be proven, but the allegations have been made at various times by senior leaders in these countries like Rajapaksa's Yamin or Khalida Zia. Fifth, the European Union too released a report on its fears over manipulation during the upcoming EU Parliament elections in June. That is called Combating Foreign Interference in Elections. They're being proactive about it, and you can read that report online as well. Of course, the major allegations historically have been made against the two Cold War powers, the US and Russia. The US for elections in South American countries, for example, which were called banana republics because of the kind of influence the CIA had in these countries that exported a lot of banana, as well as Russia that worked in East European countries, but famously also in West Germany in 1972, where they helped the leader survive a confidence vote. So given this kind of background, this kind of history, and the fresh allegations, what does Indian diplomacy really need to do? To begin with, it is necessary to be backed by research studies rather than making allegations of a foreign hand without actually substantiating them with proof. When diplomats do it, when the MEA does it, it speaks to the country's diplomatic credibility. Secondly, in the age of artificial intelligence, deepfakes, it's important to improve India's technology security capabilities constantly, technology diplomacy as well, to share best practices between other countries. The third, to counter external influences by building consumer and cyber voter awareness, and to share concerns with other democracies on these. What's Worldview's take? The best response, of course, to interference and criticism is to continue to walk the talk on democracy and on building democratic practices into India's diplomatic culture. This is very important. Since independence, India has been seen as a country that is democratic, pluralistic, and rule-abiding. This is why many speak of their shared values with India. It's an aspirational thing as well. So oversensitivity to criticism, invoking an imaginary foreign hand, or expressing loyalty to a particular government, not the state or nation, are not exemplars of a democratic diplomatic culture. And that's worth remembering. So time for those reading recommendations. And as I said, we have quite a few of them for you. First, a few books. One's called Rigged: America, Russia, and 100 Years of Covert Electoral Interference. This is by David Scheimer. It came out some time ago, but it's really, really interesting at the history of those two countries. Then two books. One's called Meddling in the Ballot Box, and then a long paper called When the Great Power Gets a Vote: The Effects of Great Power, Electoral Interventions on Election Results. This is by someone called Dov Levine. And you'll see a lot of papers by him. Then there's something called Rules and Allies, Foreign Election Interventions. This is by two authors, Bubeck and Marinov. They look at 300 elections across 100 countries worldwide for their study. This is one of my favorite books, How to Stand Up to a Dictator by Maria Ressa. What's important is what she says about how social media, and especially Facebook, can be manipulated and how to get around that. There's The Digital Divide in Democracy, How Tech Shapes and Warps Elections by Sebastian Whitman. Very worth reading, especially on the technology. Another book, Deep Disinformation: Can AI-Generated Fake News Swing an Election? That's a question many of us are asking. This is by Ashley Park Owens. And then there's Foreign Electoral Interference: The Normative Implications in Light of International Law, Human Rights, and Democratic Theory, a much more academic work by Niels Reimann. And finally, also an academic work called Election Interference, International Law, and the Future of Democracy. This is by Jens David Olin. We certainly hope you enjoyed watching this edition of Worldview, where we try to look at the impact of the world and its concerns on domestic elections. Do join us again from the team. Thanks for watching.